Have you ever wondered what it would take for a mother to send her 6-year-old daughter to knock on a stranger's door at midnight? What kind of desperation would drive someone to seek help from the most dangerous man in the city? Sometimes the answer changes everything. The sound echoes through the compound like a gunshot. 3 soft knocks on steel. Mateo Vega freezes, his hand hovering over the security monitor. Nobody knocks on his door at midnight. Nobody gets past his gates without clearance. Nobody disturbs him in his private sanctuary without facing consequences. But there it is again. 3 more knocks, softer this time, almost hesitant. 2 hours earlier, Isabella Chun had made the most terrifying decision of her life. She sat in her beat-up Honda Civic, parked 3 blocks from the address her sister had scribbled on a napkin. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the empty street besides her daughter's soft breathing from the back seat. Sophia lay curled under her favorite blanket, clutching the stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Isabella's hands trembled as she stared at the piece of paper. Mateo Vega, the name everyone whispered about in the neighborhoods where she worked as a nurse. The man who controlled half the drug trade in the city. The one people said you never wanted to meet unless you had no other choice. Tonight, she had no other choice. Her phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. I know where you work. I know where Sophia goes to school. You can't hide forever, Isabella. Come home, or I'll come get you both. The words made her stomach clench with familiar fear. 6 months since she'd left him. 6 months of looking over her shoulder, changing Sophia's school, working different shifts at the hospital. 6 months of thinking she was finally free. But Marcus wasn't the type of man who let anything go, especially not something he considered his property. The bruises on her ribs had healed. The ones on her soul remained fresh. Your sister is probably right, Isabella told herself. This is insane. Absolutely insane. She looked back at Sophia, sleeping peacefully despite everything falling apart around them. Her beautiful daughter, who asked too many questions and gave hugs that could heal hearts. The little girl who deserved a life without fear, without men like Marcus stalking their every move. The little girl who deserved a mother brave enough to do the impossible. Isabella's sister Carmen worked in the emergency room at General Hospital. She saw things, heard things, knew which paramedics brought in bodies with no questions asked, which police reports never quite got filed properly, which neighborhoods stayed mysteriously quiet after certain people had problems. He's not what you think, Carmen had whispered during their coffee break. I've seen him bring in kids from the street. Pays their medical bills, no strings. My friend Rosa says he helped her when her ex wouldn't stop following her around. One conversation, and the guy moved to another state. Just like that. Isabella had laughed bitterly. You're talking about a drug dealer, Carmen. A criminal. I'm talking about someone who protects people from the kind of monsters you're running from, Carmen had replied. Someone who has power to make problems disappear. Real problems. The kind the police can't solve. Now, sitting in her car with her daughter's safety hanging by a thread, those words echoed in Isabella's mind. Marcus had connections in the police department. Money. Influence. Every legal avenue she'd tried had led nowhere. Restraining orders were just paper. Moving hadn't worked. Changing jobs hadn't worked. Nothing had worked. But maybe, just maybe, monsters could fight monsters. Isabella woke Sophia gently, her heart breaking at the sleepy confusion in her daughter's dark eyes. Baby, I need you to do something very important for me, she whispered. We're going to visit someone who might be able to help us with the scary man. Sophia nodded solemnly. She understood more than any 6-year-old should about scary men and the need to run from them. The compound gates stood 10 feet tall, topped with razor wire that glinted under the streetlights. Security cameras tracked their approach. Isabella's palms were slick with sweat as she found the intercom button, but before she could press it, the gates swung open silently. Someone was watching. Someone had decided to let them in. The driveway curved through manicured gardens that looked deceptively peaceful in the moonlight. Isabella knew better than to be fooled by appearances. This place was a fortress disguised as a mansion, protection wrapped in luxury. She parked near the front entrance, a massive wooden door flanked by stone columns. The architecture suggested old money and older power. This wasn't the home of a street dealer. This was the stronghold of someone who controlled empires. Isabella's courage almost failed her then. What was she doing? What kind of mother brought her child to a place like this? But then her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. Another threat. Another reminder that traditional solutions had failed her completely. She knelt down to Sophia's level, smoothing her daughter's dark hair away from her face. "Listen to me very carefully, sweetheart. I want you to knock on that door and ask for Mr. Vega. Tell him your mama needs help with the scary man who won't leave us alone. Can you do that for me?" "Why can't you do it, Mama?" Sophia asked, her voice small in the vast darkness. "Because sometimes little girls are braver than grown-ups," Isabella lied. "Because sometimes grown-ups need little girls to ask for help." The truth was simpler and more cowardly. Isabella was terrified that if she knocked on that door herself, she'd lose her nerve and run. But if Sophia knocked, if her daughter was standing there vulnerable and small, maybe the man inside would listen. Maybe he'd see what Isabella saw every day, an innocent child who deserved protection from the ugliness of the world. Sophia walked up to the massive door with the kind of fearless determination that only children possessed. She stood on her tiptoes to reach the brass knocker and let it fall 3 times against the wood. Then she waited. Inside the mansion, Mateo Vega stared at his security monitors in disbelief. A woman sat slumped in a beat-up Honda Civic in his driveway, her head in her hands. And at his front door stood a little girl in pajamas and sneakers, looking up at his cameras with enormous eyes. Nobody brought children to his home. Ever. His world and innocence couldn't mix, for reasons that had been carved into his soul 15 years ago when his own sister's blood had stained these same floors. But there the child stood, waiting patiently for him to answer. Mateo was 34 years old, 6 feet 3 inches of controlled violence wrapped in expensive suits. His black hair was always perfectly styled, his olive skin bearing only faint scars from old battles fought and won. Women found him attractive, men found him terrifying, and children usually found him invisible because he made sure their paths never crossed. Tonight, apparently, was different. He opened the door slowly, keeping his expression neutral despite the shock of finding someone so small on his doorstep. The little girl looked up at him without flinching, which impressed him more than he cared to admit. Most grown men couldn't meet his eyes without sweating. "Are you Mr. Vega?" she asked in a clear voice that carried just the slightest tremor. "I am," he replied carefully. "What are you doing here, little one?" Sophia tilted her head, studying him with the kind of serious expression that belonged on much older faces. "My mama says you're the man who keeps bad people away. Is that true?" The question hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, Mateo couldn't speak. When he'd built his reputation, when he'd carved out his territory and eliminated his enemies, he'd never imagined it would lead to this moment. A child asking him to be what he'd never been called before, a protector of innocence. "Sometimes," he said finally. "Why do you ask?" "Because there's a scary man who won't leave us alone," Sophia explained with devastating honesty. "He hurts my mama and says mean things and follows us everywhere we go. Mama tried to make him stop, but nothing works. She says maybe you can make him go away forever." Mateo looked past the child to the car, where the woman sat motionless. Even in the darkness, he could see the exhaustion in her posture, the defeat in the way she held herself. He'd seen that same brokenness in too many faces over the years. Usually, those people came to him seeking revenge. This woman had sent her daughter to ask for protection. The difference mattered more than he wanted to admit. "Where is your mama now?" he asked Sophia. "In the car. She's scared to come talk to you herself because she thinks you might be scary too," Sophia said matter-of-factly. "But I told her you don't look scary. You look sad." Out of the mouths of babes. Mateo had spent years perfecting an image designed to intimidate, to warn potential enemies that crossing him would be the last mistake they ever made. But this child saw straight through the armor to something he'd thought he'd buried long ago. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophia Chun," she answered proudly. "I'm 6¾ years old." "Well, Sophia Chun, why don't you go get your mama and bring her inside? I think we should talk." Sophia's face lit up with the kind of pure relief that made Mateo's chest tighten painfully. She ran back to the car, her small feet slapping against the stone driveway. Mateo watched as she pulled open the passenger door and tugged on her mother's arm, chattering excitedly about how the scary man was going to help them and everything was going to be okay now. If only it were that simple. The woman who emerged from the car was nothing like what Mateo had expected. She was small, maybe 5'4", with straight black hair that hung past her shoulders and skin that suggested mixed heritage. Even exhausted and terrified, she was beautiful in the understated way of someone who'd never learned to use her looks as a weapon. She wore scrubs under a jacket that had seen better years, and when she looked up at him, her dark eyes held intelligence along with fear. This wasn't some gang member's girlfriend seeking revenge or a rival's plant trying to infiltrate his organization. This was exactly what she appeared to be, a working mother who'd run out of options, the kind of person his world usually destroyed without a second thought. "Isabella Chun," she said when she reached his door, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm sorry to bother you so late. I know this is crazy, showing up here like this, but I didn't know where else to turn." Mateo stepped aside, gesturing them into his foyer. The massive space was decorated with the kind of tasteful restraint that money could buy. Marble floors, original artwork, fresh flowers arranged by staff. He paid well to maintain his image. None of it seemed to impress Isabella, who was clearly too worried about her daughter's safety to care about interior design. Sophia immediately began exploring, her sneakers squeaking against the marble as she examined everything with 6-year-old curiosity. For a moment, the sound filled Mateo's home with something it hadn't held in 15 years, the laughter of a child. "Tell me about the scary man," he said to Isabella, leading them into his study where comfortable chairs surrounded a fireplace that actually worked. The room was designed for business meetings, but tonight it would serve a different purpose. Isabella sank into one of the leather chairs like a woman who hadn't sat down properly in days. "His name is Marcus Webb. He's my ex-boyfriend. We dated for 8 months before I realized what he really was." "What he really was," Mateo repeated, settling into the chair across from her, while Sophia climbed onto the window seat to watch the fountain in his courtyard. "Controlling, possessive, violent," Isabella said quietly. "It started small. Comments about my clothes, my friends, my job. Then it escalated. He didn't like me working late shifts at the hospital. Said I was probably sleeping with doctors. Started showing up at my apartment unannounced. When I tried to break up with him the first time, he said I belonged to him and he'd never let me go." Mateo felt familiar anger building in his chest. He'd encountered Marcus Webb's type before, men who confused ownership with love, who thought violence was persuasion. They were predictable in their escalation and usually cowardly when confronted by someone capable of fighting back. "What finally made you leave?" he asked. "He hit Sophia," Isabella said, her voice breaking slightly. "She spilled juice on his shirt, and he backhanded her across the face. Called her a clumsy little bitch. That's when I knew I had to get out, no matter what it cost." "Good," Mateo said firmly. "You should have left. Any man who hurts a child forfeits his right to breathe the same air." Isabella's eyes widened slightly at the cold certainty in his voice, but she didn't look away. "I thought if I moved, if I changed jobs, he'd give up. But he found us anyway. He's been escalating for weeks. Following us. Calling. Texting. Tonight he said if I didn't come back to him voluntarily, he'd take Sophia and disappear somewhere I'd never find her." The threats had reached the tipping point then. Marcus Webb had moved from intimidation to kidnapping. In Mateo's world, that kind of escalation meant only one thing. The situation would end in violence whether Isabella wanted it to or not. The only question was whether she'd be the victim or whether someone else would handle the problem for her. "Someone like him. Why come to me?" Mateo asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Why not the police?" Isabella's laugh held no humor. "I tried. Filed 3 reports. Got a restraining order. You know what Marcus said when I showed it to him? He said he had friends on the force, and the paper wasn't worth the ink it was printed on. 2 days later, one of the cops who took my statement called to tell me that sometimes these domestic situations work themselves out better without official interference. Corruption. It existed everywhere, but it was particularly frustrating when it prevented protection of the innocent." Mateo made a mental note to investigate which officers were taking Marcus Webb's money. That kind of behavior needed correction. But first, he needed to understand exactly what Isabella was asking of him. "What do you want me to do?" he said directly. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, watching her daughter trace patterns on the window glass. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Make him stop. Make him go away. Make him understand that he can't hurt us anymore." "There are different ways to make someone stop," Mateo said carefully. "Some are temporary. Some are permanent. What you're asking for will determine how I handle this." Isabella met his eyes then, and in them he saw something unexpected, steel wrapped in vulnerability. She was stronger than she appeared, this woman who'd sent her daughter to knock on a monster's door. "I just want Sophia to be safe," she said. "Whatever it takes to make that happen." It wasn't quite an order to kill Marcus Webb, but it was close enough. And given the escalation pattern Isabella had described, Matteo suspected that permanent solutions might be the only ones that worked. Before he could respond, Sophia's voice broke the tension in the room. "Mr. Vega, are you going to help us?" she asked from her perch by the window. Matteo looked at the child who'd walked fearlessly up to his door and asked him to be a hero. He thought about his sister Maria, who'd been only a year older than Sophia when rival dealers had gunned her down in retaliation for his early territory wars. He thought about the promise he'd made over her grave, that innocence would never again suffer in his presence if he had the power to prevent it. He thought about the fact that some monsters deserved to meet bigger monsters. "Yes, little one," he said finally. "I'm going to help you. You're going to be safe now." And for the first time in months, Isabella Chun allowed herself to believe that might actually be true. Isabella woke to the scent of expensive coffee and the unfamiliar sensation of safety. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed beneath her was larger than anything she'd ever slept in, covered in sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing a guest room decorated with the kind of understated luxury she'd only seen in magazines. Then memory crashed back like a cold wave. Matteo Vega, the cartel boss. She'd actually done it. She'd brought Sophia to a drug dealer's house and asked him to save them from Marcus. What kind of mother am I? The thought hit her like a physical blow as she sat up too quickly, her head spinning from exhaustion and stress. She'd been so desperate last night that she'd convinced herself this was the right choice, the only choice. But in the harsh light of morning, the insanity of her decision felt overwhelming. She was a nurse. She saved lives, followed rules, believed in the system. And now she was hiding in a criminal's mansion because the system had failed her completely. A soft knock interrupted her spiral of self-recrimination. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Sophia's familiar face. Instead, Matteo Vega appeared in the doorway, and Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Last night, fear and desperation had muted her awareness of everything except Sophia's safety. This morning, she couldn't ignore the impact of his presence. He was tall, probably 6'3", with black hair styled perfectly despite the early hour. His olive skin suggested Mediterranean heritage, and his dark eyes held an intelligence that was both reassuring and unsettling. He wore a simple white button-down shirt and dark slacks, but even casual clothes couldn't disguise the controlled power in his movements. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, and Isabella knew enough about dangerous men to recognize the warning signs her body was choosing to ignore. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying the faint trace of an accent she couldn't identify. "I hope you slept well. Sophia is having breakfast in the kitchen. She's been asking for you." "Where exactly is the kitchen?" Isabella asked, suddenly aware that she had no idea how to navigate this place. The guest room alone was larger than her entire apartment. "I'll show you," Matteo offered. "But first, we should talk about what happens next. About what you're actually asking me to do." Isabella's stomach clenched. In her desperation last night, she'd focused only on getting Sophia to safety. She hadn't thought through the implications of accepting help from someone like Matteo Vega. What did he expect in return? What did protection from a cartel boss actually cost? "I don't have money," she said quickly. "I mean, I can pay you something, but not much. Nurses don't exactly make cartel money." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his dark eyes. "I don't want your money, Isabella. What I need to understand is how far you want me to go with Marcus Webb. There are degrees of intervention." The careful way he said it made her skin prickle. She'd asked a man capable of violence to handle her violent ex-boyfriend. She shouldn't be surprised that violence was on the table. "I just want him to leave us alone," she said. "I want Sophia to be safe. Safe temporarily, or safe permanently?" Matteo asked, and there was no judgment in his voice. Just a businesslike assessment of options. Men like Marcus Webb don't usually respond to polite requests to back off. They respond to consequences they can't ignore or recover from. Isabella knew what he was really asking. Did she want Marcus dead? The answer should have been an immediate, Horrified, no. She was a nurse. She'd sworn to do no harm. She believed in rehabilitation, in second chances, in the possibility that people could change. But Marcus had hit her daughter, had threatened to take Sophia away from her, had made it clear that he would never stop hunting them, no matter how far they ran or how well they hid. Some people didn't deserve second chances. I want whatever it takes to keep Sophia safe, she said finally. I can't live in fear anymore. She can't grow up looking over her shoulder. Mateo nodded, apparently satisfied with her answer. Then I'll handle Marcus Webb. You don't need to know the details. You and Sophia can stay here until the situation is resolved. Just like that? Isabella couldn't hide her skepticism. You'll help complete strangers because a 6-year-old knocked on your door? Mateo's expression shifted, something painful flickering across his features before he locked it down. I have reasons for protecting children, he said quietly. Personal reasons. Sophia reminded me of someone I failed to protect a long time ago. There was a story there, Isabella realized. Something that explained why a man who controlled drug territories and commanded fear throughout the city had opened his door to a terrified little girl. But before she could ask, Sophia's voice echoed down the hallway. Mama, Mr. Protector is making pancakes, and they're shaped like butterflies. Mr. Protector? Isabella looked at Mateo questioningly. That's what she's calling me, he said, and for the first time since she'd met him, his smile was completely genuine. It's been a long time since anyone called me anything that innocent. They found Sophia in a kitchen that belonged in a cooking magazine. Professional-grade appliances, marble countertops, and enough space to feed an army. Sophia sat at a breakfast bar, swinging her legs as she watched Mateo flip perfectly shaped butterfly pancakes with surprising skill. He's really good at this, Mama, Sophia announced. And he said he knows where there's a swimming pool and a library and a room just for watching movies. Isabella watched her daughter's animated conversation with this dangerous man, and something twisted in her chest. When was the last time Sophia had been this relaxed, this happy? Even before Marcus, Isabella had been working double shifts to make ends meet, leaving Sophia with babysitters more often than she wanted to admit. Her daughter craved attention, stability, someone who had time to make butterfly pancakes on a Tuesday morning. The irony wasn't lost on her. The safest Sophia had felt in months was in the home of a man who probably killed people for a living. Mateo slid a plate of pancakes toward Isabella, his fingers brushing hers as he handed her the syrup. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent warmth shooting up her arm. She jerked her hand back, disturbed by her body's reaction to his touch. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like Mateo Vega survived by reading people, by catching every microexpression and unconscious response. His dark eyes held hers for a moment that stretched too long, and Isabella felt heat rising in her cheeks. This was wrong on so many levels. She was supposed to be focused on Sophia's safety, on escaping Marcus, on rebuilding their lives somewhere safe. She wasn't supposed to be noticing how Mateo's shirt stretched across his broad shoulders, or how gentle his voice became when he talked to her daughter, or how his rare smiles transformed his entire face. She wasn't supposed to be attracted to another dangerous man so soon after escaping one. But Marcus had never made her feel the way Mateo did. Marcus had never looked at Sophia with genuine fondness, had never shown patience with her endless questions, had never taken time to make her breakfast shaped like butterflies. Marcus had demanded attention, commanded obedience, taken what he wanted without asking. Mateo seemed to give rather than take, and that difference was more seductive than Isabella wanted to admit. Her phone buzzed against the marble counter, shattering the domestic tranquility. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and Isabella's appetite disappeared completely. Don't answer it, Mateo said quietly, but he didn't try to take the phone from her. Let him leave a message. I want to know what he says. The voicemail notification appeared after the ringing stopped. Isabella's hands shook as she played the message on speaker, Sophia's happy chatter fading into concerned silence. Marcus's voice filled the kitchen, tight with barely controlled rage. I know you're not at your apartment, Isabella. I know you're not at your sister's, but I'll find you eventually. You can't hide from me forever. When I do find you, you're going to wish you'd come home when I asked nicely. And that little brat of yours is going to learn what happens to kids whose mothers don't follow the rules. The message ended, leaving poisonous silence in its wake. Sophia had gone very still, her dark eyes wide with the kind of fear no 6-year-old should have to carry. "Mama, is the scary man going to find us here?" Before Isabella could answer, Matteo crouched down to Sophia's level, his voice gentle but completely confident. "No, little one. The scary man isn't going to find you here. This house has special protection, and I promise you're safe. Do you trust me?" Sophia studied his face with the serious consideration children brought to important decisions. "Yes," she said finally. "You have kind eyes. Mean people don't have kind eyes." Out of the mouths of babes indeed. Isabella felt something crack open in her chest as she watched this hardened criminal promise her daughter's safety with absolute sincerity. Whatever Matteo Vega did in his professional life, whatever blood stained his hands, he was offering them something no one else could: genuine protection. And despite every rational thought screaming warnings in her head, Isabella was beginning to trust him too. The attraction simmering between them was dangerous, inappropriate, and utterly undeniable. But as she watched him wipe syrup from Sophia's chin with careful tenderness, Isabella realized that some dangers were worth the risk, especially when the alternative was living in fear forever. "Your phone is going to keep ringing," Matteo said, straightening to his full height. "Marcus Webb is going to escalate his attempts to contact you because that's what men like him do when they lose control. But from now on, you don't have to face his threats alone." The promise in his words sent warmth through Isabella's chest, followed immediately by a spike of worry. What exactly was she getting them into? What would Matteo expect from her in return for his protection? But as Sophia giggled at something Matteo said, as her daughter's face lit up with genuine happiness for the first time in months, Isabella pushed those concerns aside. For now, they were safe. For now, Sophia could eat butterfly pancakes and explore swimming pools and sleep without nightmares. For now, that was enough, even if she was starting to want much more than just safety from the man offering it. 3 days at Matteo's compound had established routines that felt dangerously like home. Isabella discovered that the cartel boss woke at 5:30 every morning to work out in a gym that would make professional trainers weep with envy. By the time she and Sophia emerged for breakfast, he'd showered and dressed for whatever business required his attention, but he always made time to eat with them before his day began. Sophia had claimed the window seat in his study as her personal reading nook, and every evening after dinner, she would curl up there with a book while Matteo worked at his massive desk. Isabella had been surprised the first time she'd found them together, Sophia's small voice reading aloud while Matteo listened with the kind of focused attention most adults didn't give children. It was wrong how right it all felt. This morning, Isabella stood in the doorway of the study, watching her daughter snuggled against Matteo's side as he read from a book of fairy tales. His deep voice brought the characters to life, shifting accents for different speakers, adding drama to exciting parts. Sophia hung on every word, occasionally interrupting to ask questions that he answered with infinite patience. When was the last time someone had read to her daughter like this? Isabella's work schedule had been so demanding, her stress so constant, that bedtime stories had often been rushed affairs squeezed between double shifts and exhaustion. Seeing Sophia's face light up with pure joy made Isabella's chest ache with guilt and gratitude in equal measure. And there was something else, something that made her pulse quicken every time she looked at them together. Matteo's hand rested protectively on Sophia's shoulder, his thumb absently stroking her hair as he read. The gesture was so natural, so tender, that it spoke of paternal instincts Isabella hadn't expected from a man in his position. He would be a good father, she realized with a jolt that took her breath away. The thought was ridiculous, inappropriate, and utterly undeniable. This dangerous man who commanded fear throughout the city was gentle and patient with her daughter in ways that made Isabella's heart twist with longing. "Stop," she told herself firmly. "This is temporary. This isn't real. You're here for protection, not to play house with a criminal." But her heart wasn't listening to logic anymore. "Good morning, Mama," Sophia called when she spotted Isabella in the doorway. "Mr. Protector is reading me the story about the princess who saves herself." "An interesting choice," Isabella said, meeting Matteo's amused gaze over Sophia's head. "Most fairy tales have princes doing the rescuing. I prefer stories where people save themselves," Matteo replied, and there was something in his voice that suggested personal experience. "It's more realistic." "Like you saved yourself?" Sophia asked with the devastating directness of childhood. Mateo's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, walls rising behind his dark eyes. Something like that, little one. Why don't you go help your mama in the kitchen while I finish some work? Sophia scrambled down from the window seat, chattering about pancakes as she skipped toward the kitchen. Isabella lingered in the doorway, studying Mateo's suddenly guarded expression. You don't have to talk about it, she said quietly. But if you ever want to, I'm a good listener. It's part of the job description for nurses. Mateo looked up from the papers he was arranging on his desk, and for a moment his carefully maintained composure slipped. She saw exhaustion there, an old pain, and something that might have been loneliness. My sister Maria was 7 when she died, he said abruptly. A year older than Sophia. She was killed in retaliation for one of my early territory wars. The men who shot her wanted to send me a message about what happened to people who crossed them. Isabella's breath caught. Oh, Mateo, I'm so sorry. I was 24 and thought I was untouchable, he continued, his voice flat with old self-recrimination. I'd built a reputation, carved out my territory, eliminated my competition. But I was careless about protecting the people I loved. Maria paid the price for my arrogance. Is that why you helped us? Isabella asked, understanding beginning to dawn. Because Sophia reminds you of her? Mateo was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desk surface. Among other reasons, he said finally. Among other reasons. The words suggested complexities Isabella wasn't ready to examine too closely. But she couldn't deny the way her pulse quickened at the implication that she might be one of those other reasons. She was saved from having to respond by a crash from the kitchen, followed by Sophia's distressed wail. Isabella ran toward the sound, Mateo close behind her. They found Sophia standing in a puddle of orange juice and broken glass, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at the mess she'd created. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I was trying to get the juice from the high shelf, and I dropped it. I'm sorry. The apologies tumbled out in a rush that made Isabella's heart clench with recognition. Sophia had learned to apologize quickly and repeatedly from living with Marcus, who'd exploded over every minor accident, as if it were a personal attack. Hey, Isabella soothed, starting toward her daughter. It's okay, baby. Accidents happen. But Mateo was already moving, his dress shoes crunching over glass as he reached Sophia first. Without hesitation, he lifted her out of the mess, settling her on the counter away from the broken shards. No apologies necessary, little one, he said firmly but gently. Glass breaks. Juice spills. Nobody gets upset about accidents in this house. But Marcus always said, Sophia began, then stopped herself, looking stricken. Marcus was wrong about a lot of things, Mateo said, pulling paper towels from the dispenser. Adults who love children don't get angry about spilled juice. They clean it up and move on. Isabella watched him methodically clean the glass and juice while her daughter settled down, and something shifted in her chest like a lock clicking open. He didn't just tolerate Sophia's presence or show polite interest in her welfare. He actively, intentionally made her feel safe and valued. When was the last time a man had done that for either of them? Be careful of the smaller pieces, Isabella said, kneeling to help with the cleanup. Some of those shards are tiny. I see them, Mateo replied. But as he reached for a particularly small piece, the glass slipped and sliced across his palm. He cursed softly under his breath, a word in what sounded like Spanish. You're bleeding, Isabella observed, immediately shifting into nurse mode. Let me see. It's nothing, Mateo protested, but Isabella was already taking his hand in hers, turning it to examine the cut. The wound was deeper than she'd expected, a clean slice across his palm that would need attention. But what caught her breath wasn't the injury. It was the feel of his hand in hers. His palm was calloused, speaking of physical work despite his obvious wealth. His fingers were long and elegant, but strong enough to crush if necessary. This was a dangerous hand, a hand that had probably ended lives. But it was also the hand that had gently lifted her daughter to safety, the hand that had stroked Sophia's hair while reading bedtime stories. The contradictions that made up Mateo Vega were overwhelming. You need stitches, she said, her voice slightly unsteady. Where's your first aid kit? Bathroom cabinet. Upstairs, he replied, and his voice had gone rough around the edges. But Isabella. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. His dark eyes had focused on her mouth, and she realized she was unconsciously biting her lower lip as she concentrated on his injury. The air between them shifted, charging with electricity that had nothing to do with the broken glass and everything to do with the way his thumb was now tracing circles on her wrist where she held his hand. Isabella became hyper-aware of everything. The warmth of his skin against hers, the clean scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely male, the way his breathing had changed when she'd looked up at him through her lashes. This was dangerous territory. More dangerous than accepting help from a cartel boss. More dangerous than living in his home. More dangerous than trusting him with Sophia's safety. This was the danger of wanting something she couldn't have, shouldn't want, couldn't afford to complicate their situation by pursuing. But she couldn't make herself let go of his hand. "Mama?" Sophia's voice broke the tension like a glass of cold water. "Is Mr. Protector going to be okay?" "He's going to be fine," Isabella said quickly, stepping back and immediately missing the warmth of Mateo's touch. "Just a little cut. Nothing that can't be fixed. Go get the first aid kit," Mateo told her softly. "I'll wait here with Sophia." Isabella climbed the stairs to his private bathroom on unsteady legs, using the time alone to get her racing pulse under control. This attraction was natural, she told herself. She'd been terrified and isolated for months, and Mateo was offering everything she desperately needed: protection, stability, kindness toward her daughter. Of course her emotions were confused. Of course her body was responding to the first man who'd made her feel safe in longer than she could remember. But acting on those feelings would complicate everything. She was here for Sophia's protection, not to start a relationship with another dangerous man. No matter how different he seemed from Marcus, no matter how gentle he was with her daughter, Mateo Vega's world was built on violence. She couldn't afford to forget that. The first aid kit was exactly where he'd said it would be, stocked better than most emergency rooms she'd worked in. Isabella returned to the kitchen with supplies and professional determination to keep things clinical. That resolve lasted exactly until she had to hold his hand again to clean the wound. "This is going to sting," she warned, dabbing antiseptic on the cut. "I've had worse," he said, but she felt his muscles tense slightly. "In your line of work?" "I imagine you have," she replied without thinking, then immediately regretted the comment. Mateo was quiet while she worked, watching her face with the kind of focused attention that made her feel exposed. When she began carefully stitching the wound closed, his free hand came up to cup her chin, tilting her face toward his. "I'm not him," he said quietly, and she knew he meant Marcus. "I would never hurt you or Sophia. You know that, don't you?" The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "I know." "Good," he murmured, his thumb stroking along her jawline. "Because I need you to trust me completely for what comes next." "What comes next?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "Marcus escalated his search today," Mateo said, his expression hardening slightly. "My people intercepted communications showing he's hired a private investigator. He's checking social media accounts, credit card records, anything that might lead him to you." Fear spiked through Isabella's chest. "He found us." "No," Mateo said firmly. "And he won't. But it's time to send him a message he'll understand." The promise in his words was both reassuring and terrifying. Isabella finished stitching his hand in silence, hyper-aware of his fingers still touching her face, of the way his breathing had deepened, of how easy it would be to lean forward. "And Mr. Protector?" Sophia's small voice interrupted them again. "Can I ask you something important?" "Of course, little one," Mateo said, though his eyes remained fixed on Isabella's face for another heartbeat before he turned to Sophia. "Are you going to be my daddy now?" Sophia asked with devastating innocence. "Because you take care of me and Mama, and you read me stories, and you make us safe. That's what daddies do, right?" The question hung in the air like a live wire. Isabella felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and something deeper, more complex. Sophia had never had a father figure, had never experienced the kind of consistent male attention and protection Mateo provided so naturally. Of course she would want that to be permanent. That's not how it works, sweetheart," Isabella said gently, though her voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Protector is helping us right now, but we have our own life to go back to when this is over." "But when will it be over?" Sophia asked, and the question revealed how little her 6-year-old mind understood about their situation. "I like it here. I like him. Why can't we stay forever?" Forever was a concept Isabella couldn't afford to consider. This was temporary sanctuary, not a new life. No matter how safe she felt here, no matter how much Sophia had blossomed under Matteo's attention, no matter how her own heart raced every time he looked at her with those dark, knowing eyes. They weren't a family. They were refugees. But as Matteo's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her chin, as his gaze searched her face for an answer she couldn't give, Isabella wondered if the distinction mattered as much as she'd thought. "We'll see, little one," Matteo said finally. "Sometimes good things last longer than we expect." The promise in his words sent warmth flooding through Isabella's chest, followed immediately by panic. Because part of her, a part that was growing stronger every day, wanted Sophia's innocent question to become reality. And that was the most dangerous attraction of all. That night, after Sophia had been tucked into bed with stories and butterfly kisses, Isabella found herself standing on Matteo's back terrace, staring out at the gardens that surrounded his fortress like beauty wrapped around danger. She'd told herself she needed air, space to think, distance from the domestic intimacy that was messing with her head. But when Matteo appeared beside her with 2 glasses of wine, she realized she'd been hoping he would follow her. Dangerous thoughts, dangerous hopes, dangerous wanting. But as he handed her the wine and settled beside her on the stone bench, his injured hand carefully bandaged, Isabella couldn't bring herself to move away. For tonight, she would let herself pretend this was real, that they were a family, that she deserved this kind of peace, that happy endings were possible for broken single mothers and the dangerous men who protected them. Tomorrow, she would remember all the reasons this couldn't last. Tonight, she would simply enjoy the warmth of his presence and the safety of his promise to make Marcus disappear forever. Even if forever was more than she dared to hope for herself. Isabella was folding laundry in the guest room when she heard Matteo's voice change. She'd been half listening to his phone conversation from the hallway, noting the calm authority in his tone as he discussed what sounded like legitimate business matters. But suddenly his voice dropped to the register she was beginning to recognize as dangerous, the tone that reminded her exactly who she was living with. "No excuses, Antonio," he said, each word precisely enunciated. "When I say a shipment needs to disappear, it disappears. When I say someone needs to understand boundaries, they understand immediately. Are we clear?" Isabella found herself frozen with a towel half folded in her hands. This was the other side of Matteo Vega, the side that had built an empire through fear and controlled violence. The side that made men like Marcus Webb seem like amateur bullies by comparison. She should be terrified, should be grabbing Sophia and running before this man who read bedtime stories and made butterfly pancakes remembered that she'd witnessed him conducting illegal business. Instead, she felt oddly reassured. Because that controlled authority, that absolute certainty that his commands would be obeyed, that was what would protect them from Marcus. Matteo wasn't just offering them sanctuary out of kindness. He had the power to eliminate threats permanently, and he'd already decided that Marcus Webb qualified as a threat to be eliminated. When the conversation ended, Isabella made a decision that probably qualified as insane. Instead of retreating to her room and pretending she hadn't overheard, she walked into his study and closed the door behind her. Matteo looked up from his desk, his dark eyes immediately assessing her expression. "You heard that," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Isabella replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. The same chair where she'd sat that first night, terrified and desperate. Now she felt something else entirely, resolution. "Are you going to run?" Matteo asked quietly. "Take Sophia and disappear in the middle of the night, because you've remembered what I really am?" "No," Isabella said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. "I'm not going to run." Matteo leaned back in his chair, studying her face with the intensity that made her feel like he could read her thoughts. "Why not? Most people would." "Because I finally understand what you meant about degrees of intervention," Isabella said. "Because I've spent weeks being afraid of a man who enjoys hurting women and children, and I've realized that maybe it takes someone truly dangerous to stop someone like that. And you're comfortable with that? With what I might have to do?" Isabella thought about Marcus's hands on Sophia, about the bruises on her own ribs that had finally faded, about her daughter's tears when that voicemail had played in the kitchen. She thought about the fear that had controlled her life for months, the constant looking over her shoulder, the sick certainty that Marcus would eventually find them no matter how far they ran. "I'm comfortable with Sophia being safe," she said finally. "I'm comfortable with never having to be afraid of him again, whatever that requires. Even if it requires violence." "Especially if it requires violence," Isabella said, and meant it. "Some people forfeit their right to exist peacefully in the world. Marcus is one of them." Mateo's expression shifted, something like approval warming his dark eyes. "You're stronger than you realize, Isabella Chen." "I'm learning that," she replied. "Living here, seeing Sophia happy and safe, it's shown me what normal feels like. What peace feels like. I won't go back to being afraid." "Good," Mateo said, rising from his desk to move around it until he was standing close enough that she could smell his cologne. "Because I have news about Marcus that you need to hear." Isabella's pulse quickened, though whether from his proximity or the serious tone of his voice, she couldn't say. "What kind of news?" "He hired a private investigator named Reynolds, expensive and thorough. They've been systematically checking every hospital in the tri-state area, looking for nurses named Isabella with young daughters. They're also monitoring social media accounts, credit card usage, even traffic cameras." Fear spiked through Isabella's chest. "How close are they?" "Not close enough to matter," Mateo said firmly, "but close enough that it's time to end this permanently. I'm moving against Marcus tomorrow night." "Tomorrow night." The words sent ice through Isabella's veins, followed immediately by relief so profound it made her dizzy. After tomorrow, Marcus would never threaten Sophia again. After tomorrow, they could stop looking over their shoulders. After tomorrow, they would have no reason to stay in Mateo's protected world. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like loss. "Will you tell me when it's done?" she asked. "I'll tell you everything you want to know," Mateo promised. "And nothing you don't." Before Isabella could respond, Sophia's voice echoed through the house, high-pitched with distress. "Mama, Mama, I don't feel good." They found Sophia in the living room, curled on the couch with her face flushed and her eyes glassy with fever. She reached for Isabella with the kind of desperate need that meant she felt truly awful. "Oh, baby," Isabella murmured, pressing her hand to Sophia's forehead. "You're burning up." "My stomach hurts," Sophia whimpered. "And my head. And everything feels cold, but I'm hot." "Stomach bug," Isabella diagnosed, already shifting into mother mode. "Probably picked up from somewhere before we came here. It needs to run its course, but we can make you more comfortable." "What does she need?" Mateo asked, and Isabella was surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. He was already reaching for his phone. "Should I call a doctor?" "No doctor necessary for a stomach virus," Isabella said. "But I'll need to monitor her fever and keep her hydrated. She's going to be miserable for the next day or two. What can I do to help?" The question caught Isabella off guard. Marcus had always treated Sophia's illnesses as inconveniences that interfered with his plans. He'd never offered to help, never shown concern for her discomfort, never adjusted his schedule to accommodate a sick child's needs. But Mateo was looking at Sophia with the kind of worried attention that spoke of genuine care, and Isabella felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "She'll want to stay close to me," Isabella said. "Sick kids are clingy. But if you could bring some extra blankets, maybe some crackers and ginger ale when her stomach settles." "Consider it done," Mateo said immediately. "And Isabella? Don't hesitate to wake me if you need anything during the night, even if she just wants someone to read to her." The offer was so unexpectedly sweet that Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had offered to share the burden of caring for Sophia? When was the last time a man had shown this kind of paternal concern for her daughter's welfare? "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it more than he probably realized. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of fever management and comfort measures. Sophia was indeed clingy, wanting to be held constantly, and Isabella found herself grateful for Mateo's spacious guest room when she set up camp there with everything they needed. Mateo appeared regularly with supplies. Ice chips when Sophia couldn't keep liquids down, extra pillows when she couldn't get comfortable, children's fever reducer when her temperature spiked. He never intruded, never made Isabella feel like Sophia's illness was disrupting his household. Instead, he anticipated their needs and provided solutions without being asked. When Sophia finally fell into a deeper sleep around midnight, Isabella realized she was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with staying up all night. The emotional intensity of watching Mateo care for her sick daughter, The relief of having genuine help instead of handling everything alone. The growing certainty that this man would never see Sophia as a burden or inconvenience. It was overwhelming. She found him in his study, still awake despite the late hour, reading what appeared to be business reports by the light of his desk lamp. "How is she?" he asked immediately, rising when Isabella appeared in the doorway. "Better. Fever broke an hour ago, and she's sleeping peacefully," Isabella said. "Thank you for everything today. The way you helped, the things you brought her. It meant a lot. She's important to you, which makes her important to me," Matteo said simply. "Is there anything else she needs tonight?" "Just sleep," Isabella replied. "And maybe some toast in the morning if she's feeling better." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and Isabella became aware of how intimate this felt. The quiet house, the late hour, the shared concern for Sophia's welfare. It felt like family, like partnership, like something she'd never had but had always wanted. "I should go back to her," Isabella said, though she made no move to leave. "Yes," Matteo agreed, but he didn't step away either. The air between them was charged with something deeper than physical attraction, something that had been building since that first morning when he'd made Sophia butterfly pancakes. This was emotional intimacy, the recognition that they'd become important to each other in ways that had nothing to do with protection and everything to do with connection. "Isabella," Matteo said quietly, his voice rough with something that might have been uncertainty. "When this is over, when Marcus is no longer a threat." "What?" she whispered, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. "Stay," he said, the single word carrying more weight than entire speeches. "Both of you, stay here with me." The offer hung between them like a bridge spanning an impossible distance. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed what he was really asking. Not just temporary sanctuary, but permanent belonging. Not just protection, but partnership. Not just safety, but home. "Matteo," she breathed, and realized she was crying without knowing when the tears had started. "I know it's crazy," he continued, stepping closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I know my world is dangerous and complicated and nothing like the life you planned for Sophia. But these past weeks, watching you both here, seeing how happy she is, how safe you feel." He stopped, running a hand through his dark hair in the first sign of genuine uncertainty she'd seen from him. "I've been alone for 15 years, Isabella. I convinced myself that was safer, better, the only way to protect the people I cared about. But having you here, having Sophia call me Mr. Protector and ask if I'm going to be her daddy, it's shown me what I've been missing." "You barely know us," Isabella whispered, though her heart was screaming yes to everything he was offering. "I know enough," Matteo said firmly. "I know you're brave enough to knock on a stranger's door when your child needs protecting. I know you're strong enough to accept help from someone like me when the alternative is living in fear. I know Sophia is brilliant and funny and deserves a father who will read her stories and make her butterfly pancakes and keep her safe from anyone who would hurt her. And you want to be that father?" "I want to try," Matteo said, his voice soft with vulnerability. "If you'll let me." Isabella felt the last of her walls crumble as she looked into his dark eyes and saw not a dangerous cartel boss, but a man who genuinely loved her daughter and wanted to build a life with them both. The smart thing would be to say no. To thank him for his protection, wait for him to eliminate Marcus, and then return to their old life with gratitude and boundaries intact. But their old life had been fear and isolation and working double shifts just to make ends meet. Their old life had been Sophia asking why other kids had daddies and she didn't, asking when someone would love them enough to want to stay forever. This life included danger, but it also included butterfly pancakes and bedtime stories and a man who worried about Sophia's fever and offered to share the burden of caring for her. This life included love. "Yes," Isabella whispered, and watched Matteo's face transform with relief and joy. "Yes, we'll stay." He reached for her then, his hands framing her face with careful reverence, his thumbs brushing away her tears. When he kissed her, it was soft and gentle and full of promise, nothing like the violent possession she'd learned to expect from men who claimed to want her. This was invitation rather than demand, partnership rather than ownership, love rather than control. Isabella melted into the kiss, into the warmth of his arms, into the possibility of a future that included safety and happiness, and a man who chose to protect rather than possess. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Matteo rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love Sofia. I want to marry you, adopt her legally, give you both my name and my protection permanently. I want us to be a family." The words should have been overwhelming, too much too fast, impossible to process. Instead, they felt like coming home. "I love you too," Isabella whispered, and meant it with every broken and healed piece of her heart. Later, when Matteo walked her back to the guest room where Sofia slept peacefully, Isabella found herself lingering in the doorway instead of saying goodnight. Sofia was breathing deeply, her fever completely broken, color returned to her cheeks. She looked peaceful and safe, surrounded by soft blankets in a room where no one would ever hurt her again. "She's beautiful," Matteo murmured, his voice full of wonder. "Just like her mother." Isabella turned to face him, suddenly aware that they were alone in the quiet hallway, that Sofia was sleeping soundly, that tomorrow might change everything. The emotions of the day, the relief of his declaration, the certainty that she wanted this life with him, it all combined into a need that took her breath away. "Matteo," she whispered, and he understood immediately. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands coming up to frame her face. "We don't have to rush anything. We have time now." "I'm sure," Isabella said, and realized she'd never been more certain of anything in her life. "I want this. I want you." He kissed her then, deeper than before, with passion tempered by reverence. When he lifted her into his arms, carrying her to his bedroom down the hall, Isabella felt like she was floating. His room was masculine and elegant, all dark wood and crisp linens, but Isabella barely noticed the decor. Her attention was completely focused on the man setting her gently on her feet beside his bed, on the way his dark eyes searched her face for any sign of uncertainty. There was none. There was only love and trust, and the bone-deep certainty that this was right. They undressed each other slowly, trading kisses and whispered endearments, taking time to explore and appreciate. When Matteo laid her back against his pillows, when he loved her with a combination of passion and tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, Isabella understood the difference between being taken and being cherished. This was what love felt like. This was what safety felt like. This was what home felt like. Afterwards, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Isabella traced patterns on Matteo's chest and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that terrifying night when she'd sent Sofia to knock on his door, to this moment of perfect peace and connection. "I never thought I could feel this way again," she admitted quietly. "I thought Marcus had broken something in me that couldn't be fixed." "You were never broken," Matteo said firmly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You were just with the wrong person. Someone who took instead of giving, who demanded instead of cherishing." "And you're the right person?" Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. "I want to be," Matteo said. "For both of you. For the rest of my life." The promise settled into Isabella's heart, like a missing piece finally sliding into place. Tomorrow would bring the end of Marcus's threats. Tomorrow would begin their new life as a real family. Tonight was perfect exactly as it was. Sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the only right choice. Sometimes protection came wrapped in violence. Love came with risks, and happy endings required trusting dangerous men with gentle hearts. Sometimes little girls really could knock on the right door at midnight and find everything they'd been searching for, everything they deserved, everything that had been waiting for them all along. Isabella woke to the sound of her phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. For a moment, she was disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, the weight of Matteo's arm around her waist, the complete sense of safety that had allowed her to sleep more deeply than she had in months. Then reality crashed back, and she realized the phone had been ringing for several minutes. 3:47 in the morning. Nobody called with good news at that hour. "Isabella? It's Carmen." Her sister's voice was tight with fear. "I'm sorry to wake you, but I need to tell you something important. A man came to the hospital tonight asking about you." Isabella's blood turned to ice. She carefully extracted herself from Matteo's arms, padding to the bathroom where she could talk without waking him. "What kind of man?" she whispered. "Older guy, maybe 50, expensive suit. Said he was a private investigator working a missing persons case. He had photos of you and Sofia. Knew your work schedule, knew which units you'd worked in." "Isabella, he knew things that weren't public record." Reynolds, Isabella breathed. The PI Mateo had mentioned. He said you weren't in trouble, that someone was just worried about your welfare. Carmen continued. But something felt wrong about it. The questions he asked, the way he kept pushing for information about your friends, your habits, where you might go if you were hiding from someone. Did you tell him anything? Isabella asked, though she already knew Carmen was too smart to fall for that approach. Nothing useful. But Isabella, he knew about our coffee breaks. He knew which cafeteria table we usually sit at. He's been watching the hospital, learning your routine. Isabella's hands shook as the implications sank in. Marcus had found her workplace, identified her associates, mapped her normal patterns. If she'd been living her regular life, he would have had her by now. There's something else, Carmen said quietly. I checked the parking garage after my shift. There's a man sitting in a car across from where you used to park. He's been there for hours, just watching. They found the hospital. They were probably tracing every connection, every friend, every place Isabella might seek help. Which meant, I have to go, Isabella said abruptly. Carmen, if anyone else asks about me, you don't know anything. You haven't seen me. You don't know where I am. You have no idea who might be helping me. Understand? Isabella, what's going on? Where are you? Somewhere safe, Isabella said. But it won't stay safe if they can trace connections back to me. I love you, but don't try to contact me again until this is over. She hung up before Carmen could protest, her heart hammering against her ribs as the full scope of their situation became clear. Reynolds wasn't just systematically checking hospitals and social media. He was mapping Isabella's entire life, identifying everyone who mattered to her, everyone who might help her or shelter her. How long before he connected her to someone who knew about Mateo? How long before Marcus realized that the scared nurse he'd been stalking had somehow gained the protection of the most dangerous man in the city? Isabella hurried back to the bedroom, gently shaking Mateo awake. His eyes opened immediately, instantly alert in the way of someone accustomed to danger. What's wrong? He asked, already sitting up. Isabella quickly explained Carmen's call, watching Mateo's expression harden as she described Reynolds' questions and the surveillance at the hospital. They're mapping your connections, Mateo said grimly, reaching for his phone. How long before they trace your sister to you? You to your sister's warnings, and those warnings to the fact that you found protection somewhere. His phone was already buzzing with incoming messages. Mateo's expression grew darker as he read them. What is it? Isabella asked. My security team picked up unusual activity around the perimeter an hour ago. Vehicle with tinted windows did 3 slow passes, then parked a quarter-mile from the main gate, Mateo said, already moving toward his closet. I thought it was routine surveillance, but combined with your sister's call. They found us, Isabella whispered. Not us, Mateo corrected, pulling on clothes with efficient speed. They found the general area. But this compound has multiple layers of security, and they don't know the layout. We have advantages they don't. Isabella felt nauseated as the reality of their situation crashed over her. After weeks of safety, Marcus was closing in. But worse than her own fear was the terror at what this meant for Sophia, sleeping peacefully down the hall, unaware that the nightmare was about to begin again. I need to get Sophia, she said, starting toward the door. Mateo caught her wrist gently but firmly. Isabella, listen to me. My men are the best at what they do. This compound was designed to withstand exactly this kind of threat. But if something goes wrong, if they somehow breach the outer defenses, I need you and Sophia in the safe room immediately. Safe room? Reinforced steel, independent air supply, communication equipment. Enough supplies for 72 hours, Mateo explained quickly. It's behind the bookshelf in my study. The access code is Sophia's birthday. The fact that he'd programmed his security system with her daughter's birthday hit Isabella like a physical blow. This man had made them part of his most protected spaces, had literally built them into his safeguards. Nothing is going to happen to you or Sophia, Mateo promised, his hands cupping her face. But I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that? Before Isabella could answer, an alarm began blaring throughout the house. Not the gentle chime of the doorbell or the soft alert of a phone, but a harsh, urgent sound that spoke of immediate danger. Perimeter breach, Mateo said, his voice shifting to the cold authority she recognized from his business calls. Stay here. I'll get Sophia. He was gone before Isabella could protest. moving with the kind of controlled urgency that reminded her exactly how dangerous he could be when protecting what mattered to him. Isabella threw on clothes with shaking hands, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong. Marcus was here. After weeks of safety, he'd found them, and now the violence Mateo had promised was about to become reality. She should be terrified, should be regretting every decision that had brought them to this moment. Instead, she felt oddly calm. Because Mateo had prepared for this. Because he had men trained to handle threats like Marcus. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing danger alone. Mateo appeared in the doorway carrying a sleepy, confused Sophia wrapped in her favorite blanket. "What's happening, Mama?" Sophia asked, her voice small and scared. "Just some bad people trying to get into Mr. Protector's house," Isabella said, taking her daughter and holding her close. "But remember what we talked about? Mr. Protector is very good at keeping bad people away." The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere outside the house, sharp cracks that made Isabella flinch and Sophia whimper. "Safe room, now," Mateo ordered, leading them quickly down the hall to his study. The bookshelf swung inward at his touch, revealing a space that looked like something from a spy movie. Reinforced walls, multiple monitors showing security camera feeds, communication equipment, and enough food and water to last for days. "This is amazing," Sophia breathed, momentarily distracted from her fear by the secret room. "You'll be completely safe here," Mateo promised, settling them inside. "The walls are reinforced steel. Nothing can get through them. Watch the monitors, and you'll see my men handling the situation." Isabella studied the security feeds, counting at least a dozen figures in tactical gear moving with professional precision around the compound's perimeter. These weren't panicked amateurs. They were soldiers, and they were winning. "Where are you going?" she asked as Mateo turned toward the door. "To end this permanently," he replied, and the cold certainty in his voice made Isabella shiver. She caught his arm as he started to leave. "Be careful, please. We can't lose you." The vulnerability in her voice made Mateo's expression soften. "You're not going to lose me," he promised, pressing a quick, fierce kiss to her lips. "I've been waiting 15 years for a family worth protecting. I'm not about to let some pathetic stalker take that away from me." He was gone before Isabella could respond, the bookshelf sliding shut behind him with a soft hiss of hidden hydraulics. Isabella watched the monitors with her heart in her throat as Mateo appeared on various camera feeds, moving through his house with lethal purpose. On the perimeter cameras, she could see his men systematically eliminating the threat, their movements coordinated and efficient. Marcus had brought maybe 6 men with him. Mateo commanded an army. It should have been over quickly, but then Isabella saw movement on the camera feed covering the east wing. A single figure, moving separately from the main group, had somehow made it inside the house itself. Marcus. She recognized his build, his movement patterns, the way he held himself. Somehow, while his hired men created a distraction at the front of the compound, he'd found a way to breach the house itself. And he was moving toward the guest wing, where Isabella and Sophia's rooms were located. Isabella's blood turned to ice as she realized what was happening. Marcus wasn't trying to escape with his life. He was making one final, desperate attempt to take what he considered his property. He was coming for Sophia. Isabella grabbed the communication equipment, frantically trying to figure out how to contact Mateo to warn him that Marcus was inside the house. But before she could make the system work, she heard Sophia's sharp intake of breath. "Mama, look," Sophia whispered, pointing at one of the monitors. The screen showed the hallway outside Mateo's study. Marcus was there, bloody and disheveled but very much alive, examining the bookshelf that concealed their hiding place. He'd found them. Isabella's hands shook as she tried to remember if Mateo had locked the safe room from the outside, if there was any way Marcus could get through the reinforced door. But as she watched, Marcus pulled something from his jacket. Not a gun. Something smaller. Some kind of electronic device that he pressed against the bookshelf near the hidden switch. The bastard had come prepared. He'd researched Mateo's security systems, brought equipment designed to override electronic locks. The bookshelf began to slide open. Isabella pulled Sophia behind her, her mind racing through options. There was nowhere to run. No other exit from the safe room. No weapons except her determination to protect her daughter. But as Marcus stepped into the safe room, as his familiar face twisted with the rage and possessiveness that had controlled her life for months. Isabella realized something had changed. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. "Hello, Isabella," Marcus said, his voice deceptively calm. "Interesting place you found to hide. Very expensive. Very protected. Too bad your new boyfriend doesn't know how to secure his own home properly." He stepped further into the room, and Isabella could see the desperation beneath his controlled facade. This wasn't the same man who dominated her through fear and violence. This was a cornered animal making a final, desperate play. "Let Sophia go," Isabella said quietly. "This is between us. She doesn't need to be part of it." "Oh, but she does," Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on Sophia with an intensity that made Isabella's skin crawl. "See, Isabella, you've cost me a lot of money tonight. A lot of time. A lot of effort. I think the kid needs to learn what happens when her mother makes poor choices." He moved towards Sophia, and Isabella stepped directly into his path. "Touch her, and I'll kill you myself," she said, and meant every word. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You? Kill me? Isabella, you couldn't even leave me properly. You had to run away in the middle of the night like a coward." "I left because you're a monster," Isabella replied. "Because you hit my daughter and threatened to take her away from me. Because you're a pathetic excuse for a man who thinks violence makes him powerful." Marcus's face darkened with rage. "You always did have too much mouth," he snarled, reaching for Sophia. That was his mistake. Because as his hand extended toward her daughter, as Marcus focused entirely on the threat he thought Isabella posed, he missed the real danger approaching from behind. Matteo appeared in the doorway like death incarnate, moving with silent lethality. His clothes were torn, there was blood on his knuckles, and his dark eyes held a promise of violence that made Marcus's cruelty look like children playing dress-up. "Step away from my family," Matteo said quietly. The words carried absolute finality. Not a request, not a threat, a statement of fact. Marcus spun around, his face going white as he recognized exactly who he was facing. "Your family?" he stammered. "They're not your family. She's my girlfriend. The kid is mine to discipline." "Wrong on all counts," Matteo said, stepping into the safe room with predatory grace. "They're mine to protect. And you just made the last mistake of your life." Isabella watched as Marcus realized the scope of his error. He'd brought hired guns to threaten a man who commanded armies. He'd tried to intimidate someone who eliminated threats for a living. He'd put his hands on the family of someone capable of making people disappear without a trace. "Wait," Marcus said, his voice cracking with sudden fear. "We can work something out. I'll disappear. I'll never bother them again." "You will disappear," Matteo agreed. "The only question is how." But as Matteo moved closer, as Marcus backed away in genuine terror for the first time in his miserable life, the coward made one final desperate play. He lunged for Sophia. It happened in slow motion and lightning speed simultaneously. Marcus grabbing for her daughter, Sophia's scream of terror, Isabella throwing herself between them, and Matteo moving faster than should have been humanly possible. The sound Marcus made when Matteo caught him wasn't quite human. It spoke of pain and terror and the sudden understanding that he'd finally met someone more dangerous than himself. Marcus Webb died as he'd lived, trying to hurt someone smaller and more vulnerable than himself. When it was over, when the threat that had controlled Isabella's life for months was finally eliminated, Matteo turned to them with blood on his hands and love in his eyes. "It's finished," he said simply. "He'll never hurt you again." Sophia launched herself into his arms, crying with relief and residual terror. Matteo held her close, murmuring reassurances in her ear while his eyes met Isabella's over their daughter's head. In his gaze, Isabella saw promise. Commitment. A future where Sophia would never again have to fear the monsters that stalked the weak and innocent. Sometimes protection came wrapped in violence. Sometimes love required eliminating threats. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the room was exactly the one you wanted on your side. "Thank you," Isabella whispered, and Matteo understood she was thanking him for much more than just stopping Marcus. She was thanking him for choosing them, for making them his family, for being willing to kill and die to keep them safe. Forever had never felt more certain. The silence that followed Marcus Webb's death was the most beautiful sound Isabella had ever heard. No more threats. No more fear. No more looking over her shoulder or jumping at unexpected sounds. The man who terrorized them for months was gone, eliminated by someone with the power and will to end threats permanently. Sophia was still clinging to Matteo, her small body shaking with residual terror, but her tears had stopped. She felt safe in his arms, just as Isabella felt safe knowing he would always stand between them and anyone who meant them harm. Is he really gone? Sophia whispered, her voice muffled against Matteo's shoulder. He's really gone, little one, Matteo confirmed gently. The scary man can never hurt you or your mama again. Isabella watched her daughter's face transform as the reality sank in. No more hiding. No more running. No more being afraid to go to school or play in the park or live like a normal child. Freedom, safety, peace. All because a 6-year-old girl had been brave enough to knock on a dangerous man's door at midnight. Matteo's cleanup crew arrived within the hour, efficient professionals who made Marcus Webb's body and his hired men disappear as if they'd never existed. Isabella probably should have been disturbed by how quickly and thoroughly they erased all evidence of the night's violence. Instead, she felt grateful. By dawn, the compound was peaceful again. The damage to the security systems had been repaired, the grounds cleaned, the threat eliminated so completely that it felt like a nightmare that had finally ended. But as Isabella sat with Sophia in Matteo's kitchen, watching him make breakfast as if nothing had happened, she realized that ending the nightmare was only the beginning. Now they had to decide what came next. You're both exhausted, Matteo observed, setting plates of eggs and toast in front of them. Why don't you get some sleep? Everything else can wait. I don't think I could sleep right now, Isabella admitted. Too much adrenaline. Too much. Processing. Matteo nodded understandingly. The first time you eliminate a threat, the aftermath can be overwhelming. Your body knows you're safe, but your mind needs time to catch up. The first time, Isabella realized that for Matteo, last night had been just another threat handled, another problem solved. Violence was part of his world, as natural as breathing. But he'd used that violence to protect her and Sophia. He'd killed to keep them safe. The thought should have disturbed her more than it did. Can I ask you something? Sophia said suddenly, looking up at Matteo with those serious dark eyes that always seemed too old for her face. Of course, little one. Are you going to send us away now? Sophia asked, and the question broke Isabella's heart. Now that the scary man is gone, do we have to leave? Matteo was quiet for a long moment, his expression carefully neutral. That depends, he said finally. Do you want to leave? No. Sophia said immediately. I like it here. I like you. I like having a swimming pool and a big library and someone who makes me butterfly pancakes. I like feeling safe. And what about you? Matteo asked, his dark eyes finding Isabella's. Do you want to leave? Isabella felt the weight of the question, the magnitude of what he was really asking. Staying meant accepting his world permanently, raising Sophia surrounded by danger and violence. It meant giving up any pretense of a normal life. But normal had never kept them safe. Normal had left them vulnerable to men like Marcus. And this man, this dangerous, beautiful man who'd opened his door to a terrified little girl and protected them with his life, he was offering them something better than normal. He was offering them love. No, Isabella said quietly. I don't want to leave either. Matteo's carefully controlled expression cracked, relief and joy flooding his features. Good, he said roughly. Because I wasn't planning to let you go anyway. Sophia giggled at that, the first genuinely happy sound she'd made since waking up to gunfire and alarms. Are you really going to be my daddy now? She asked. If your mama will let me, Matteo replied, looking at Isabella with hope and vulnerability that made her chest ache. If she'll marry me and let me adopt you legally and make this family official. The proposal shouldn't have been surprising. They'd already declared their love, already committed to staying together. But hearing him ask, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes as if she might somehow refuse, made Isabella's heart swell with emotions too big for words. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, I'll marry you. Sophia shrieked with delight, bouncing in her chair as she clapped her hands. Can I be in the wedding? Can I wear a pretty dress? Can I throw flowers? You can do whatever you want at the wedding, Matteo promised, but his eyes never left Isabella's face. This is really happening? You're really going to marry me? I'm really going to marry you, Isabella confirmed, and wondered how she'd gotten so lucky. How a nightmare had turned into a fairy tale. How the most dangerous choice had become the most perfect choice. how love had found them in the last place she'd ever expected to look. The next 3 months passed in a blur of wedding planning, legal paperwork, and settling into their new life as an official family. Matteo insisted on doing everything properly, hiring the best lawyers to handle Sophia's adoption, the best planners to organize a wedding that would be worthy of his new bride. Isabella tried to protest the expense, the elaborate preparations, the sheer scope of what he was planning. But Matteo was determined to give them the kind of celebration that announced to his world and hers that Isabella Chun and her daughter were now under his permanent protection, that they belonged to him, and he to them. The guest list was an interesting mix of Isabella's normal world and Matteo's dangerous one. Her sister Carmen, her co-workers from the hospital, a few close friends who'd somehow managed to accept that quiet nurse Isabella was marrying the most feared man in the city. Mixed with Matteo's associates, his business partners, the carefully dressed men and women who controlled territories and commanded respect through means Isabella preferred not to examine too closely. But they were all there for the same reason: to witness the marriage of two people who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances. The ceremony took place in the gardens of Matteo's compound, transformed into something magical by professional decorators and thousands of white flowers. Isabella wore a dress that cost more than her old apartment's yearly rent, but she felt beautiful in it, worthy of the man waiting for her at the flower-covered altar. Sophia was radiant in her flower girl dress, a confection of white silk and tiny pearls that made her look like a princess from one of the fairy tales Matteo read to her every night. She took her job seriously, scattering rose petals with careful precision as she walked down the aisle ahead of her mother. But the moment that brought tears to everyone's eyes came during the vows, when the minister asked if anyone objected to the union. Sophia's small voice piped up from the front row. "I object," she announced, and Isabella's heart stopped. Until Sophia continued, "I object to waiting any longer. Can Mr. Protector be my daddy now?" The laughter that rippled through the gathered guests was warm and genuine, and Matteo's smile was brighter than the summer sun as he knelt down to Sophia's level. "Would you like that, little one?" he asked gently. "Would you like me to officially be your papa?" "Yes," Sophia exclaimed, launching herself into his arms. "I've been waiting forever." And there it was. The moment Isabella had dreamed of but never dared hope for. Her daughter finally had a father who chose her, who wanted her, who would protect her and love her for the rest of her life. When Matteo stood with Sophia still in his arms, when he kissed Isabella with their daughter giggling between them, when the minister pronounced them a family in every legal and spiritual sense, Isabella knew that every terrifying moment that had led them here had been worth it. The reception was everything Matteo had promised: elegant, joyful, and completely safe. His security was invisible but absolute, ensuring that nothing could disturb their perfect day. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, as Sophia twirled around them in her princess dress, as their guests celebrated the union of protection and love, Isabella marveled at how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a terrified single mother hiding from an abusive ex-boyfriend. Tonight, she was dancing at her own wedding, surrounded by people who would die before they let anyone hurt her or Sophia. She was home. The months that followed their wedding were the happiest of Isabella's life. Matteo was everything she'd hoped for in a husband: protective without being controlling, generous without being condescending, patient with Sophia's endless questions and boundless energy. He gradually shifted his business interests toward more legitimate enterprises, using his connections and capital to invest in legal ventures that would provide security for their family's future. Isabella returned to nursing part-time, working at a private clinic that served both his world and hers, healing people who needed discretion along with medical care. Sophia thrived in the expensive private school Matteo enrolled her in, making friends with children whose families understood the importance of security and privacy. She never questioned why their house had more guards than most, never worried about the men in suits who sometimes came to meet with her papa. She only knew that she was loved, protected, and free to be a normal little girl. But perhaps the most beautiful change came 18 months after their wedding, when Isabella discovered she was pregnant. She'd been feeling tired for weeks, nauseous in the mornings, emotional in ways that reminded her of her pregnancy with Sophia. The test confirmed what she'd already suspected, and as she stared at the positive result, Isabella felt a complex mix of joy and terror. This baby would be born into Mateo's world completely, would never know anything but the protection and privilege that came with being his biological child. But would it be enough? Would she be a good mother to a child who would grow up surrounded by violence and danger, even if that violence was always directed away from them? Her concerns lasted exactly until she told Mateo the news. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: pure joy, overwhelming gratitude, and a tenderness that made her fall in love with him all over again. "You're going to be amazing," he whispered against her hair as he held her close. "Our baby is going to be so loved, so protected. Nothing will ever threaten our children. Our children." The words settled into Isabella's heart like a promise. When they told Sophia, her reaction was predictably dramatic. "I'm going to be a big sister?" she shrieked, bouncing on her bed where they'd gathered for the announcement. "Really? Really, really? Really, really," Isabella confirmed, laughing at her daughter's excitement. "Can I teach the baby things? Can I help pick out clothes? Can I read stories like Papa reads to me?" "You can do all of that and more," Mateo promised. "You're going to be the best big sister in the world." Sophia threw herself into planning for her new sibling with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else. She helped convert the guest room into a nursery, insisted on accompanying Isabella to every doctor's appointment, and spent hours talking to Isabella's growing belly about all the fun things they would do together. Watching Mateo with Sophia during the pregnancy was a revelation. He was naturally paternal, patient with her questions about babies and bodies and how families grew. He read books about pregnancy and child development, consulted with the best pediatricians, and prepared for their new baby with the same meticulous planning he brought to everything important in his life. But it was the quiet moments that touched Isabella's heart most deeply. Finding him talking softly to her belly late at night, his hands gentle on her skin as he told their unborn child about the family waiting to welcome them. Watching him help Sophia practice holding dolls and bottles, teaching her how to be gentle and protective. This was the man Marcus had tried to keep them from finding. This was the father Sophia had always deserved. This was the husband Isabella had never dared dream of having. The baby arrived on a snowy December morning, after 12 hours of labor that Mateo endured with more anxiety than Isabella had ever seen him show. But when their daughter finally made her appearance, when Dr. Reyes placed the tiny, perfect baby in Isabella's arms, Mateo's face transformed with wonder. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She's perfect." Sophia, who'd been waiting in the hallway with Carmen, burst into the room the moment she was allowed, climbing carefully onto the hospital bed to meet her new sister. "What's her name?" Sophia asked, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. Isabella looked at Mateo, and they shared one of those wordless communications that came with deep love and understanding. "Maria," Isabella said softly. "Her name is Maria." Mateo's eyes filled with tears as he understood the honor Isabella was giving him, naming their daughter after the sister he'd lost, the little girl whose death had shaped him into the protector he'd become. It was perfect. It was healing. It was hope for the future wrapped in the blessing of the past. Little Maria Vega came home to a house filled with love and laughter and the absolute certainty that she would always be safe. Sophia appointed herself head of baby protection, ensuring that no loud noises disturbed her sister's sleep and that everyone who wanted to hold Maria had properly washed their hands first. Watching her family settle into their new dynamic, Isabella marveled at how complete everything felt. How right, how perfectly all the broken pieces had fit together to create something beautiful and whole. But perhaps the most telling moment came 6 months later, on a quiet evening when Isabella was nursing Maria while Mateo helped Sophia with homework at the kitchen table. The doorbell rang, not the sharp alarm that indicated security threats, but the gentle chime that announced approved visitors. Mateo frowned, checking his watch. They weren't expecting anyone. The security monitor showed a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, standing at their front gate in clothes that had seen better days. She was holding the hand of a little boy who couldn't have been more than 4, both of them looking scared and exhausted. Mateo was already moving toward the door before the intercom crackled to life. "Please," the young woman's voice was shaky with desperation. "I need to see Mateo Vega." "My brother said He said you help people sometimes, when they have nowhere else to go. Isabella felt her heart clench with recognition. Another desperate person seeking protection from the man who'd saved them. Another family with nowhere to turn. Mateo looked back at Isabella, and she saw the same recognition in his eyes. The same understanding that some circles had to remain unbroken. "Let them in," she said softly. Mateo opened the gates. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in the same living room where Isabella had first asked for help, listening to a story that was heartbreakingly familiar. The young woman was Lisa, the little boy her nephew Jake. Lisa's sister had been killed by an abusive boyfriend who was now hunting them, determined to eliminate the witnesses to his crime. "He's threatened to take Jake," Lisa said, her voice breaking as she held her nephew close. "Said if I don't tell the police I made up the whole story about seeing him kill my sister, he'll make sure Jake disappears where nobody will ever find him." Isabella watched Mateo's face harden with familiar resolve as he listened to Lisa's story. This was who he was now. Not just a cartel boss protecting his territory, but a guardian who stood between the innocent and those who would harm them. The man who'd answered his door to a scared little girl asking for protection had evolved into something bigger, something more important than the dangerous reputation that had first drawn Isabella to him. He'd become exactly what Sophia had called him from the beginning, Mr. Protector. "You and Jake will stay here tonight," Mateo said firmly. "Tomorrow, I'll handle the man who's threatening you. By the end of the week, he'll no longer be a problem." The promise in his words was absolute. This was what he did now, what they did. They provided sanctuary for people who had nowhere else to turn. They used Mateo's resources and reputation to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Later that night, after Lisa and Jake had been settled in guest rooms, after Sophia had been assured that helping people was always the right thing to do, Isabella found herself standing in the nursery, watching Mateo rock their sleeping daughter. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "This life? The choices that brought us here?" Mateo looked up at her with eyes full of love and certainty. "Never," he said simply. "Every choice led me to you, to Sophia, to this family. Every dangerous decision, every violent moment, every risk I took was worth it because it brought me here. Even killing Marcus? Even the blood on your hands?" "Especially that," Mateo replied without hesitation. "I would kill 1,000 men like Marcus Webb to keep you and our children safe. I would burn down the world before I let anyone hurt our family." The fierce certainty in his voice should have been frightening. Instead, it was the most comforting thing Isabella had ever heard. This was love in its purest form. Protection without limits. Devotion without boundaries. A man who would destroy anyone who threatened the family he'd chosen. Some people might call it obsession or possession. Isabella called it perfect. As she settled beside him in the rocking chair, as baby Maria slept peacefully between them, as the sounds of their household settling for the night drifted around them, Isabella thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that terrifying night when she'd sent Sophia to knock on a dangerous stranger's door to this moment of perfect domestic peace, every step had led them exactly where they needed to be. Sometimes love came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes protection required accepting help from dangerous people. Sometimes the scariest choice turned out to be the best choice. And sometimes, if you were very brave and very lucky, knocking on the right door could change everything. "I love you," Isabella whispered, watching Mateo's face soften with the same wonder he'd shown the first time she'd said those words. "I love you too," he replied. "Both of you. All of us. Forever." Forever had never sounded so much like a promise she could believe in. Outside their peaceful home, the world continued to be dangerous and unpredictable. There would always be men like Marcus who preyed on the vulnerable, always be families like Lisa and Jake's who needed protection from those who would harm them. But inside these walls, surrounded by Mateo's love and protection, Isabella knew that her children would grow up safe and cherished and free to become whoever they were meant to be. That was worth every risk she'd taken, every dangerous choice she'd made. That was worth everything. "Do you think other people could find the kind of happiness we've found?" Isabella asked, thinking about all the families still living in fear, still searching for someone strong enough to protect them from the monsters in their lives. "Do you think there are other little girls out there brave enough to knock on the right door?" Mateo smiled, the expression transforming his face from dangerous to beautiful. "I think there are heroes everywhere," he said. "People brave enough to ask for help when they need it, strong enough to protect the ones they love, smart enough to recognize when someone is offering them safety. Just like a certain nurse I know who sent her daughter to find the scariest man in the city and ask him to keep them safe. Isabella laughed, remembering the terror and desperation that had driven her to that impossible choice. The best decision she'd ever made. The decision that had given them everything. And if you're reading this, if you're in your own situation where you need to find that kind of courage, that willingness to ask for help from unexpected places, maybe it's time to think about what doors you need to knock on, what chances you need to take, what love might be waiting for you if you're brave enough to reach for it. Sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the only right choice. Sometimes it's worth the risk. Sometimes love and protection come from the places you least expect to find them. Sometimes all it takes is 3 soft knocks on the right door at midnight to change everything forever.